Hi, and welcome to Field Notes. I'm Connie Chan, and this is a new video podcast series from Andreessen Horowitz, where we talk about the business models and behaviors changing in consumer technology. Today, I'm with my guest, Deb Liu. Deb is the CEO of Ancestry and the former VP of Commerce at Meta. We'll be talking all about marketplaces, what metrics to focus on, how to balance growth and focus, and how to turn user behavior into business strategy. Deb is also a career coach on the side, so we'll also be diving into her best career tips. So, Deb, let's start with Ancestry, where you are currently the CEO of Ancestry. I heard that you joined this company remotely. You hadn't met them in person. And we know a lot of people right now, even today, are doing interviews on Zoom. What tips do you have for people in thinking, especially executives? Like, tell me about joining a company as CEO without having ever stepped into the building.
Well, first, I think it was, really intimidating. Like you're picking a CEO for a company they had just bought for $4.7 billion. Blackstone did the entire interview process in Zoom. And it was such an honor to meet so many people and to be able to connect with them multiple times. But at the same time, you really don't know what someone's like unless you really meet them. The other part that was really funny was that I actually, they set me up with the executives. So this is when I was deciding whether to join. And instead of telling them who I was, they set up the meetings blind, where on the other side, they just said, you're meeting the CEO. And then I show up on Zoom. And I didn't know the first couple, I didn't realize they had not told them who I was. And they look at me and I said, are you okay? And they said, and I said, do you want to Google me? And each of them said, yes. And then I realized what they had done. And it was so interesting because I met them all in one day. And it was very interesting because to walk in blind and actually to see your new manager, your new boss, and have no information about her, it was just really fascinating
Wow.
for them too.
What a interesting introduction into your role as CEO. But I love that you are CEO of such a large company. And I wanted to talk a little bit about Ancestry specifically because I think a lot of people don't realize Ancestry's done a lot of pioneering work with AI, and AI is all the rage right now. But you mean even recently deploying handwriting recognition to try and search the US Census? Like, what other ways is Ancestry using AI? And what are you excited about with regards to AI?
Well, AI is going to revolutionize our entire industry. I mean, we did 1940 census. It took us 9 months and hundreds of people hand keying and indexing the records. So think about that. I mean, there's like a million pages of records. And so what they did was they just dropped the pages and it's just images, right? And so, 1940, 9 months, and we spent, a ton of money and a ton of time making it happen. And so for 1950, we
Yeah.
wanted to be absolutely prepared. So we built an AI model. We actually created pages, we tested it, we tried all these different things. And then it took 9 days to digitize the entire census. On the other side, I think AI will really transform storytelling too. Because someone's life story is now available on Ancestry. We can actually build stories about people's lives based on just the records people have saved on there. And so I just think that that's going to help people really bring the stories of their families to life, and not just connecting over records and birth, marriage, death, but also the life that they actually led.
You guys have a massive data set on people's heritages, like their grandparents, their great grandparents, their great great grandparents. Like, how are you thinking about the data opportunity inside Ancestry?
Well, first, we have 40 billion records, 75% of which is completely exclusive to Ancestry. And so these are records like draft cards, birth certificates, but also we digitize a lot of land records and local records as well. And so this past year, we had a record year. So 5 billion pieces of content, digitized. And then this coming year, for 2023, we're going to triple that because of the AI work that we're doing, which is bringing on 15 billion more records.
Like, when I think about AI, I often wonder, like, okay, fast forward 5 years from now, paint a picture of like what could be possible. Is there anything you can share on a couple years from now, 5 years, 10 years from now? Like, what will we be able to know about our past through a company like Ancestry?
Well, part of it is really, the storytelling, why, not just the what, which we have a lot of those
Yeah.
records, but the why. Can we find letters? Can we digitize people's records, that the letters that they have, photos that they have? Can we actually record the oral history of our family so that, and then transcribe them so that we can
Mm,
help bring that storytelling to life? Can we automatically create, books around the story of your family without you
yeah.
having to do, hundreds and hundreds of hours of writing? These are the most powerful things that I think we could bring to life. And I hope that that will come to pass soon.
So, storytelling actually has been part of an arc in your career because you spent a lot of time also figuring out how to bridge relationships at Facebook, where you spent a good chunk of your career. You were leading platform, payments, games, and marketplaces. What are some of the parallels that you saw between either the missions of the two companies or the type of work you were doing?
Well, part of the work that I did at Facebook all those years was really about connection. The theme for Facebook Marketplace when we started it was connecting people through commerce. And, it's not really just about like transactions. It's about actually changing people's lives through how you connect them. And so the same thing in Ancestry is really connecting people to their own family story. And, social media and Facebook is about storytelling. It's just you're telling it in the present. And Ancestry is telling the story in the past. And so those things will come together because today becomes the past very, very soon. And so that's why this job attracted me, is because a lot of the work that I did at Facebook was about connecting people in the present with transactions, with, connecting with your community, connecting through commerce. And now, it's another way of connecting. And that's the theme of my career, which has been technology can really bring us closer together if we do it right.
And you've definitely spent your time at companies working on projects that are bringing people together. And I want to get a little bit more tactical because I know a lot of our listeners are founders or people who are building products. And you've built a lot of those things at Meta almost from the ground up. So what are some types of advice that you give? Let's start with marketplaces, right? Like what are some types of advice that you will give to marketplace founders? Whether they are doing cold start or maybe they're trying to figure out how to scale it, or they're hitting issues where supply is greater than demand or vice versa.
I think the biggest thing about building a marketplace is, what is your right to win? Like, what is the category and what is the narrow thing that you have an advantage in that no one else has? Whether it's an interest, whether it's sellers or buyers, whether it's a niche or brand, knowing who you are and what it is that makes you special is the first and most important step to building a marketplace.
Does
And I
that
think that
mean
means,
though, if there's already a marketplace that addresses those buyers and sellers, that there's no room for a
no,
new
you can have a
competitor?
totally different take on it. I mean, look at eBay. I worked at eBay for many years, and what eBay did really well was all of the categories. But what they did poorly was any individual category. And you've seen entire categories get
Mm,
moved off of eBay because they couldn't do really well by, rental properties. They couldn't do really well by,
yeah,
collectibles. They couldn't do really well by, handmade sellers. So you can see these marketplaces saying, hey, if we just focus on these buyers and sellers, we could do this better. And we don't have all the categories, but we have the
yeah.
ones that really matter to our customers.
But then those marketplaces where they pick something off, eventually the goal is to recreate the large big player that covers a lot of categories, right? Everything that picks off something from Craigslist, the ultimate goal is to build back Craigslist.
But if you think about it, like for example, Airbnb grew out of Craigslist, for example, local rentals, but they haven't been in every category, right? They ended up,
That's true.
and so focus is incredibly important. And the same thing is true for, if you look at Etsy, like they're just not going to be in used cars and parts and things that are really strong
Yeah,
today. And so really kind of knowing who you're going to be and what you're going to be and having a vision for what is the thing that I want to win first, and then look at the concentric circles.
yeah.
Some of those concentric circles will never overlap. Etsy will probably never
So
sell car parts.
how do you figure out though, like what is the next concentric circle to tackle, right? Because Etsy started with handmade things. Now there's a bunch of stuff on there that's not handmade, actually. Lots of cross-border stuff. People say a lot of the Chinese cross-border Amazon sellers are now all on Etsy. Whether that's true or not, I'm not sure. But the point being, like, how do you figure out if you are building a marketplace, what is the next category to go after and when to do it?
Yeah. So first, what is the most similar category to what you're doing? So Amazon did books because there's ISBN, there's there's all, it was very structured, very easy to
Yeah.
look up. Categories were already there. But the next thing they did was CDs because music published by large publishers had a very similar categorization. One of the most recent things they've been trying to do for a long time is soft goods, right? Basically, clothing, which is very, very hard when you have a
Yeah.
very structured system.
Right.
And so
Right.
really where you start will take you longer and longer to get out to the edges. I think the thing about Etsy is, what they did was they attracted a type of buyer, and now they're trying to figure out what categories meets that type of buyer. I am an Etsy buyer. I actually buy these bears made, these alpaca fur bears my daughter collects on there. And, a lot of them are made in Peru and imported into America. And they're handmade, but they're made by artisans who actually, but it's not the sellers. So it's not the sellers are actually just
Mm.
third parties.
Yeah.
And my daughter collects them and they're beautiful. But as a buyer of handmade goods, this is a category that's like an extension of something that I would buy because I've bought a number of other handmade things. And so the question
Yeah.
has to become, how true do you stay to your core? And then in which next concentric circle are you willing to
Yeah.
go? And what, in really meeting your buyers where they are, what are the things that they're looking for? But I do think they have to be really careful because it becomes, something where it feels like it's the inauthenticity of like a manufactured good. These bears are still handmade. But they're just not made by the seller. That's one thing.
Yeah.
But then if they're manufactured in mass production, they're going to feel really inauthentic to me as a buyer. And so I think they're walking a really fine line of growth as well as
Yeah.
authenticity.
And so as you've studied all these large existing marketplaces and you've built some of them or worked at some of them yourself, what are some of the big things you think they did right that people don't think about or are aware of? Or some missteps that you think might have caused them to go off track?
Well, I think what eBay did that was really special was having people trust each other online to send money in the mail. That just seemed so crazy at the time. But I remember I was an early eBay seller and people would just mail me money orders. It's like mailing cash in the mail to another person. People would send me checks, which had all their information on it. And it just, but it was that trust system that they built. The
Yeah.
reputation system was something where you can send something to someone else, like money to someone else, and they're going to mail you a thing in the mail. That just seems so crazy. And yet their reputation
Yeah.
system was able to build that connection between people. I think PayPal augmented that so that you didn't feel like you had to research trust, that there was a layer. And so it actually accelerated the growth. I think what
Mhm.
changed though for eBay was that the reputation system actually became a double-edged sword. Part of it was that every employee of eBay knew that you didn't want to buy from somebody that had a 4.8 star or less, because in order to give someone a negative feedback as a seller, you basically had to burn your buyer account. You had to be willing to never come back because the seller was going to do something called retaliatory negative feedback, which was give you negative feedback as a buyer. And so the system
Huh.
was set up to protect sellers and to hurt buyers in some negative way, which wasn't known to the company for a long time. And part of that really hurt the reputation because now somebody who's a 4.6 seller, which you would think is very good in the world, suddenly became like a really negative experience. And yet people didn't know how to complain. They would complain quietly to PayPal, they would get their money back, but then they would never actually publish a negative a star because they were afraid to burn their account. And so you're creating incentives on both sides and how you think about those incentives. And so I wrote an article really thinking about ratings and reviews in detail. A lot of sites, it's a mutual agreement. So some sites do it, Airbnb, for example, where you both give each other feedback, but then they reveal it at the same time. And so that
Okay.
way you can't get, you don't see the feedback before
There's
you
no
give your feedback.
retaliation.
No
Yeah.
retaliation. They do it that way. Another way is eBay just doesn't allow buyers to get negative feedback from sellers because buyers completed their part of the transaction by paying
Yeah.
and making the purchase. And so they changed their policy at some point. But the point is
Yeah.
really thinking hard about the reputation and trust system can make or break you over time.
What about a marketplace like Amazon? How do you think, what are some things that you think that they've done particularly well?
Well, what they did wonderfully was, when they didn't have the inventory, they supplement. They were actually a first party seller, and then they tested auctions and it didn't work. And then suddenly they said, you know what, we're going to have this buy box and a third party marketplace and just see what happens. And suddenly it's opened up a whole new avenue to bring a long tail of product that they could never have had and warehoused in their own inventory.
Yeah.
And so it really brought selection to the fore and it allowed people to compete for the buy box. And so you're competing on quality of service, plus you're competing on price. And so they use both dimensions to actually see, you basically get no sales if you're not in the buy box. And so what they did was they gamified to sellers. And so I think each
Hmm.
marketplace really needs to think about, what are you incenting? Are you incenting good behavior or just trying to prevent bad behavior? And those things matter a lot over time.
Yeah. And how early should founders be thinking about this? Or is this like core to how the whole product is set up from day one?
It should be absolutely core to how the product is set up. So one of the biggest challenges you see in marketplaces is, it's people can there's seller fraud, there's buyer fraud, and there's collusion fraud.
Yeah.
And every marketplace needs to think about all of those things at the same time. If you don't build that in from the start, you could really lose the thread, and it could cost you a lot of money.
Yeah, that makes sense. What advice do you give for people who are in the growth stage where they actually have a great product, there's good liquidity, but they're not kind of hitting the growth targets that they're looking for? Maybe that's category expansion, but how do you counsel marketplaces on growth?
Well, I think sometimes it's easy to let's just open new categories, right? But really, the
Yeah.
question is, are you actually deepening your relationship every single day with your buyers? And to really looking hard at the retention curves, the J curves, and seeing if you are you retaining them,
Yeah.
and is your product getting better every day? One of the things we did for Facebook Marketplace was we at first our first metric wasn't transactions because we couldn't measure them. It was how often people were coming. It was weekly to monthly actives because as a classifieds
Huh.
marketplace, you look at classifieds marketplaces and it's about frequency. Basically, people don't buy anything unless they come. And they don't come if they're
Right.
not top of
Right.
mind. And so really it was good.
Right.
Can we get them there? And then once we got them there is can we get them to message people? And then once we message people, can we get sellers to mark this as sold? And so it was really a single step. But then over time, we actually saw traffic going up. So people came back more often. If they made a transaction satisfactorily, they would come back more often over time. And so then you look
Yeah.
at the J curves. And I think a lot of marketplaces are it's just like, let's just look at raw tonnage of transactions. But you know what?
Yeah. Most marketplaces, the metrics people focus on, it's all numbers, it's all dollars. It's not number of users or frequency of visits or any of that.
But if you actually search leaky bucket in eBay, there was an article written about this where, at some point it became a leaky bucket. And then you burn through entire countries of buyers.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
becomes a huge
Yeah.
problem. And I think they're trying to fix that now. But I think one of the big issues that marketplaces have is you can always bring more people through the door with enough dollars. The question is, can you deepen your
Yeah.
relationship with them? What is your actual 30-day, 90-day, 180-day retention?
Those buyers, what are some things that you did at Facebook Marketplace to get them to spend more time or check it more frequently, have better retention? Anything you can share there?
Well, in a marketplace where the goods are completely dynamic. So, for example, you're unlikely to go to Airbnb if you're not traveling, right? You just don't go and
Right.
browse and see what's available. But in a browse marketplace, it's really important to bring people in. So we gave people
Yeah.
reasons to come in. Every time you actually loaded the marketplace tab, the top of the tab was completely different, had different items on it. So it never felt static. We were
Yeah.
constantly rethinking. So then we added this thing called top picks.
Like even if there was nothing new, you would shuffle
Yeah,
it?
you would just reshuffle it. So you're constantly reshuffling because it felt like
Right.
you want people to have that feeling of there's something new here every day. And so really knowing what you occupy and where you are
Yeah.
matters a lot to actually how you build the experience.
And in that browse scenario, because a lot of marketplaces tend to be a little bit more browsing, how do you figure out how to balance there's sellers that they've already purchased from before, or maybe there's a restaurant they always order on DoorDash. How do you surface that versus showing the net new restaurants that they haven't tried?
Well, I think the best thing is really understand people's behaviors. There's a group of people who only buy one thing, right? When I go
Yeah.
to DoorDash, I go to because I have this favorite Mexican restaurant that was across the street from PayPal. I still go to, and when we order there, we order like 10 burritos and we eat it for like several days. And so they should show someone like me that. But when I'm in a different location, they should suggest every single thing that's possible out there. When we travel, I want to discover new things. I love Vietnamese food.
Right.
My kids are like, let's find the local Vietnamese food and let's go have banh mi, And so, showing me a selection of things that I've looked for before when I'm in a different place. And so really thinking hard about what is the job to be done for this person at this moment and when they come, and how can I actually
Yeah.
take all the data I have on their previous visits and bring it all together.
I really love that idea of focusing not just on the dollars, the top line dollars, the GMV that's going through, the take rates. I mean, that all matters. But to your point, if the buyers aren't browsing, you have fewer and fewer chances to get them to convert to a transaction. So even
Yeah.
just figuring out everyday traffic is a really important metric that
Yeah. Well,
marketplaces should take into account.
it's traffic, but conversion on traffic. But the other thing you said was it's not just traffic versus GMV. It's, are you thinking about GMV? Or are you thinking about transactions? And so there was a
Mhm.
time, and this was back when Flipkart was growing like crazy. They really, really chased GMV. And so they sold a ton of mobile phones because it was a high GMV item. Amazon, on
Right.
the other hand, like, how many transactions? Like, I'd rather you buy a, $2 kind of tube of toothpaste here than $200, right? Because
Yeah.
it's all about frequency of use, because now you're really dependent on it. You
And
sign
that
up for
drives things like Prime that
yes.
unlocks a bunch of other stuff.
And so the whole point is their approach was really different. If you're chasing GMV, you want to sell high
Yeah.
GMV, growth categories. If you're chasing transactions, which is people come back, buy a $2 tube of toothpaste, then you really, your behavior, what you present to people is really different.
This is amazing feedback, I think, for a lot of founders to focus on just general traffic and retention, not just GMV. Very, very important. I also want to talk about a different aspect of what I think makes you so amazing of a role model for a lot of folks in tech, which is that you're also an author. You are also really big on mentorship. You also are the creator of not just a book, but also a newsletter that a lot of readers are reading and consuming on learning how to be, especially females, how to be a successful female in tech. Talk a little bit about how you moonlight as a career coach and you've mentored hundreds of people. What kind of career advice do you give those lucky mentees of yours? And what's something tactical that you can share with our audience?
Well, recently I wrote this article. It's like, tell them what you want. And I know it sounds really crazy, but so many people call me, and I do these kind of 15-minute coaching sessions. It's usually strangers. They text me, I call them. And someone's like, well, I want to get promoted, but I don't know how. I'm like, well, what happened when you told your manager you want to get promoted? And it's like silence. They said, well, how do you get promoted if you don't tell somebody? And I realized that sometimes we get in our own way. Like, we know what we're supposed to do. And my job is not to tell people what to do, but to unlock in them what they need to know to get, because a lot of these people know they should have done that before calling me. And I'm like, why don't you call me back after you talk to your manager? But the point is, I think sometimes we just assume that things are supposed to work a certain way because it's comfortable for us. But by,
Yeah.
I tell people, if you don't hear no enough, you're probably not asking enough.
How often should we be hearing no?
Well, like, think about, I read a lot of stories about founders. They're like, I went to 30 VCs, and but you just need two people, one or two people to say yes, right? And the
Right.
whole point is,
Right.
if hearing no is something that you're allergic to, you're never going to be able to raise money. How do you get your first partner? You're going to be the underdog for a long time, and if you don't, allow yourself to hear no a lot, and the answer might be not now. Thank you. I know this
Yeah.
isn't right for you now. Let's talk in six
Yeah.
months. But I think sometimes we get in our own heads and we worry so much about what other people think about us. But if you treat it as a numbers game, I remember talking to one founder, and she just had a list, and she's like, here's all the people who turned me down, but here's the one who said yes. And I said, how did you deal with that much rejection? And she said, I realized that my goal was not to get everyone to say yes, but to get the right one to say yes.
Thanks for watching Field Notes, my new video podcast series featuring leaders in consumer tech. For more career advice, emerging trends, and marketplace tactics, check out part 2 of my conversation with Deb, dropping later this week. And be sure to subscribe to the A16Z channel so you don't miss an episode.